Takeru is an ugly, overworked, middle-aged man who hates his boring life. One day, after returning home from his dead-end job, he collapses onto his couch to watch some TV, but all of a sudden, he finds himself teleported to a strange dimension with Discount Hero X sitting across from him. He says he's the one in charge of the solar system. So Takeru asks him if he's an alien, but he says he's actually more like a god, at least as far as Takeru is concerned. Long story short, it's his job to make sure the life on various different planets doesn't go extinct, and he does that by throwing people into new worlds to see what happens. Takeru happens to be the next on the list of people to be sent out, and of course he has the right to refuse, but since he's technically dead right now, his soul will vanish if he doesn't agree to be sent to another world. Takeru doesn't think that's fair at all, and he's right, it's not fair, but there's nothing he can do about it. Kami tells him he doesn't have to worry about it too much since he will be given special powers so he can survive in the new world, but he hasn't really thought about what abilities he should give Takeru, so he takes out a notepad and starts writing down some ideas. Obviously, he would need to be able to use magic, so Kami writes down maxed out mana and asks Takeru if there's anything else he'd want to get. Since Kami is accepting requests, Takeru asks him if he can get a big OP goth girlfriend in the new world. But with how ugly and boring Takeru is, Kami says it won't be easy. Still, he promises to work something out for him once he arrives, and as an added bonus, is granting Takeru an amazing search ability, global language understanding, and several debuff resistances. He's honestly not sure if he's allowed to give people so many op stats in one go, but there's no time to change it now since Takeru's body has already begun to disappear, so he wishes him good luck with his new life. In the next moment, Takeru wakes up lying next to a tree, and he has a good grasp of what happened, but he wonders what he should do now. He decides to just start walking in a random direction in hopes of running into some people, and fortunately, he manages to spot a village close by. Although going there right now wouldn't do him much good since he is 100% broke right now. Just then, he remembers that Kami said he'd be getting a search skill to help him gather material, and that sounds like a good way to earn money, so he holds out his stick and shouts for the search magic to activate, but nothing happens. He then starts freaking out because if he can't figure out how to use his ability, then he's going to starve sooner or later. He starts writing out possible trigger words in the ground, and he eventually comes up with the idea to just say the word search. And that seems to do the trick. Purple icons pop up next to all the harvestable items in the area, and if he says the word scan next to one, it shows a detailed description of what it is. This particular flower happens to be B rank, and he's not sure what that means, but it must be good, so he decides to gather as many plants as he can from this area. After a few minutes of gathering, Takeru has gotten a few pieces of everything this area of the forest has to offer. But most of the plants turn out to be E rank, so he's not sure if doing this was worth the effort. Just then, he notices a pretty rock nearby, and he wonders if it's valuable enough to sell, but when he picks it up, his scan tells him it's just a big piece of anterior poop, which is gross, but the poop is C rank for some reason, so he can't complain. He has gathered up enough resources for the day, so he decides that it's time to head over to the village and see how much money he can get from selling these. By nightfall, Takeru eventually arrives at the village gates where he meets one of the guards, and I can't tell if Takeru is really tall or if the guard is just really short. The guard's name is Marlowe, and he is surprised to hear that Takeru is a gatherer because it's rare to see people like him around here. Marlowe assumes he must be here to sell some materials, so he opens the gate and tells Takeru to head to the village's general store. Takeru eventually arrives at the general store, and there he meets the store owner behind the front desk. He asks the man if he is willing to buy some stuff from him, and as he says this, he pulls the poop rock out of his bag. The owner is amazed when he sees the rock because it's an amazing find, so he offers to pay 5 gold coins for it. Takeru is glad to hear that he can sell the rock, but he's not sure what 5 gold coins are really worth here, so he asks the owner for a little explanation. The owner tells him that if he wanted to stay at an inn, he'd have to pay around 500 raves, and 5 gold coins are worth 5,000 raves total, so this poop rock is actually pretty valuable. The owner asks Takeru if he has any more goods to offer, so he empties his bag, and the owner can't believe all the exotic plants he managed to gather. He asks why Takeru bothered coming to a remote village like this if he had this many valuable items, so he explains that he just picked these up during his journey here. The old man understands, and now that he has an idea of Takeru's skills, he says he has a favorite ask. Takeru didn't come here expecting to receive a side quest, but he says he's willing to help depending on the difficulty of the request. So the owner explains that he wants Takeru to get some mithril ore from the eastern mountains. That sounds like a lot of work, but the owner says he's willing to pay 360 gold coins for it, so Takeru accepts the mission. However, the owner then turns serious and mentions that there are monsters out in those mountains, and hearing that makes Takeru really nervous, so he is going to need to be careful. That night, Takeru rents out a room at the village inn, and he is glad he finally gets a chance to relax. The only thing that'd make this better is if he could get a bath, but he's not sure where to find one. Just then, one of the housekeepers knocks on the door and comes in with a bowl of hot water. Takeru asks her what this is for, so she explains that part of their service is to offer guests bowls of hot water so they can clean themselves, and Takeru's stench practically made her eyes water while he was checking in, so she brought some without him needing to ask for it. Takeru appreciates the gesture, but he says he'd prefer to have a proper bath instead. However, the girl looks at him in confusion because only nobles and rich people can afford to have baths, and Takeru has Broki written all over his face. He falls to his knees at the realization that he won't be able to take baths normally in this world, and the girl can see that he's really upset about not getting a bath, so she tells him that there are some wizards who are able to use spells to clean others, so maybe he could try that instead. After hearing her mention wizards, Takeru remembers that Kami gave him the ability to use magic, so he should be able to use a cleaning spell. He's really grateful for the girl's insight, so he gives her a huge tip as thanks and sends her on her way. Once she's gone, he attempts to use cleaning magic by yelling out the word clean, and it works on the first try. However, feeling the magic rub all over his body causes him to make some weird noises, so the girl probably thinks he's a weirdo now. On the bright side, the clean spell seems to be really effective, so Takeru isn't going to have to worry about smelling funky all the time, but he still wishes he could enjoy a proper bath. The next day, Takeru heads out to gather a few more items to sell when he notices a new symbol from his search skill. Each symbol represents a particular kind of loot, so he wonders what it might be. But to his utter horror, when he takes a look, he finds a decomposing skeleton on the ground. His scan tells him that this poor guy is named Belria, and he must have died fighting out here a while ago. He goes closer to inspect the corpse, and that's when he finds a locket with a note on it. The note was from Belria's little sister, and she was basically thanking him for working so hard to earn money to treat their father's illness, but more than anything, she just wanted her brother to make it home safely, so she asked him not to do anything too dangerous. But he clearly didn't listen to her advice. Takeru spends the next hour holding a burial for Belria, and once that's done, he draws a circle and casts a barrier so he can set up camp. The next morning, Takeru heads further into the forest until he arrives at the Forest of White Trees. This place is supposedly full of monsters and creepy as hell, so Takeru would have loved to avoid this place altogether, but it's the only way for him to get to the eastern mountain. He casts a light spell so he can see well enough to scan the area, but he doesn't spot anything of high value. Even weirder is the fact that he doesn't see any monsters around here, even though this place is supposed to be crawling with them. He doesn't question it too much and decides to take advantage of the strange absence of monsters to breeze his way through the forest. However, as he was running, he ended up falling straight off the edge of a cliff. There's no way he'd survive a drop like this, so he desperately starts calling out spell words in an attempt to save himself, and fortunately, when he says the word fly, a floating spell activates, allowing him to land safely. He's now stuck at the bottom of a cavern, but he notices a ton of ores in the nearby walls, so he decides to make the most of it and starts mining them out. He finds a lot of valuable ores like silver, but there's still no sign of any mithril, so he decides to head deeper into the caves. After walking for a bit, his search skill alerts him to an ore deep in some rocks, but before Takeru could head over, he feels the entire cave system begin to shake, so he's going to need to be careful. He uses a controlled fire blast to break through the rock, and as luck would have it, he manages to find some mithril ore, but it's not much. The cave system suddenly begins shaking again, so Takeru is starting to worry that the roof might collapse. The smart thing to do right now would be to head home for the day and come back when you know it's safe, but just like a fanatic cage diver, he decides to keep going deeper anyway. He eventually comes across an opening which leads him to a beautiful aquifer, and he is really excited because the water looks so dazzling. He uses his ability to scan it, and to his surprise, he discovered that this is S-rank ancient dragon magical water. This is the most valuable thing he has ever found, but that ancient dragon part does concern him a little since he wouldn't want to have to deal with one of those. Just then, as Takeru dips his hands in the water, something huge emerges from the water, and a moment later, Takeru is face to face with the ancient dragon. The dragon yells at him for daring to intrude upon its lair, and it is letting off a deadly pressure to intimidate Takeru, but he doesn't actually notice anything wrong. Takeru realizes this is his fault for intruding on the dragon's home, so he sincerely apologizes for his mistake, but this catches the dragon off guard since it has never seen someone remain so calm in its presence before. It takes a liking to Takeru and asks him if he's really a human because he has an unnaturally high amount of mana. It says Takeru's mana pool might even be greater than its own, but Takeru has no idea what it's talking about. The dragon's name is Voldius, and he has a favorite ask now that he knows Takeru has such an expansive mana pool. Basically, it wants Takeru to hatch its egg since it doesn't have enough mana to do it, and as a reward, it will give him a large cluster of mithril ore. Takeru thinks that sounds easy enough to do, so he takes the egg and starts channeling mana into it. But halfway through, the egg suddenly starts draining all his mana until he eventually loses consciousness. By the time he wakes up, he finds a little baby dragon sitting in front of him, so he realizes the hatching was a success. Voldius is glad to see his child has finally been born, but he then proceeds to ask Takeru to take it with him on his journey. Takeru asks if he's sure about this since he thought Voldius would want to spend time with his kid, but Voldius says Takeru is far stronger than him, so his child would be better off with him. And now that Voldius has some milk to buy at the bottom of his lake, so he submerges himself and leaves Takeru to take care of Bee. Takeru and Bee eventually make it out of the cave, but it's almost dark out and it'll be difficult for them to travel through the forest once it's nighttime. He decides that the best course of action is to hunker down for the night and continue traveling tomorrow, so he tells Bee to get ready to set up camp. First, he reaches into his storage bag and fetches some of the magic water that he got from the cave for Bee. The magic water is apparently essential for the growth of a young dragon, so it's a good thing he got so much of it. After Bee is done with her first cup, she asks Takeru for some more, but when he brings another cup of water, instead of taking it, she pushes it towards Takeru, encouraging him to drink it instead. Takeru isn't particularly thrilled by the idea of drinking water a dragon has been skinny dipping in for centuries, but he doesn't want to say no to Bee, so he downs the glass, and it actually doesn't taste that bad. It's now time for Takeru to set up camp, so he sets down a few magic stones to create a protective barrier. Technically, in this world, magic stones are supposed to be an insanely valuable commodity, but he's able to casually make them by just thinking about a spell really hard and pouring magic into his hand. This one, for instance, is a heating magic stone, and Takeru plans to use it to prepare tonight's dinner, so he sets it up in the fireplace and starts cooking. He's making some grilled steak and meat stew to go alongside it. This has always been his favorite dish, and it looks like Bee wants to have a taste as well because she's practically drooling all over herself at this point. Takeru isn't sure if it's alright for a baby dragon to eat real food when it was born like 2 hours ago, but he gives her a bowl anyway, and Bee promptly burns her lips because she had no idea the soup was so hot. Takeru blows on it a little to help cool it down and hands it back to Bee so she can give it a proper taste, and she absolutely loves the stew. Takeru is glad to see that Bee liked his cooking so much, but he wonders how she feels about having to leave Voldius behind. Bee stares at Takeru with a confused expression on her face because why would she miss Voldius when she's got Takeru right here? While Bee is hugging him, he uses his appraisal skill on her, and he is surprised to see that Bee is already B rank even though she's still so little and cute. She also has a bunch of strong-sounding gifts like limitless evolution, so she's bound to become stronger than him eventually, but he wants to make it clear that she's absolutely forbidden from doing anything that'd be too reckless. Which is good advice in principle, but Bee wasn't listening at all. The next morning, Takeru climbs back up the cliff, and when he gets to the top, he's surprised to see that the forest seems totally normal now. He wonders what could have caused such a drastic change overnight, but it's not his job to figure things like this out, so he decides to just let it go. Since he's here anyway, he figures he might as well do some gathering, so he uses his search ability to scan for any C-rank ingredients nearby, but just as he's about to start picking them up, Bee comes flying over to him in a panic because there's something scary in the forest. Takeru switches the target of his scan to any hostile monsters in the area, and sure enough, he locates half a dozen hostiles closing in on them. He may not enjoy fighting, but he's more than capable of dealing with a few monsters on his own. All of a sudden, a rock griffin appears behind him, but compared to Voldius, this barely seems like an inconvenience, and if anything, he can't wait to taste the bird's juicy meat once he kills it. He casts his shield to protect himself and then conjures up 3 ice needles before shooting them at the monster and taking it down in one fell swoop. He then turns to face the horde of wolves that's closing in on him and to deal with them. He casts some enhancement magic on himself to boost his movement speed and jumps into the air to evade the wolves' initial attack. He then casts hardening on his hands and feet and caves one skull in on his way down with an axe kick. Afterwards, he takes the remaining wolves out one after another, and by the time he's done, he's got a lot of meat to collect for his next meal. He's happy with the haul he got from that battle, but when he looks up, he realizes there are still a ton of monsters out there, and if he tries fighting them all, he's going to be stuck in this forest for weeks. He wishes there was a way he could just avoid dealing with them altogether. And as he says this, Bee grabs onto the back of his jacket and starts trying to pull him into the air. Takeru wasn't expecting this to work since Bee is so much smaller than him. But as it turns out, she's actually pretty strong, so she manages to lift him into the air. However, at this rate, it'll take them 4 to 5 business days to get out of this forest. So Takeru decides to help out by casting weight reduction magic on himself. The second he does that, he and Bee shoot straight into the air, but Bee isn't exactly a trustworthy pilot. So midway through the flight, she accidentally lets go of Tegru, and he is sent hurtling straight for the ground. Somehow, he managed to survive that devastating fall, and on the bright side, he managed to make it out of the white forest in a matter of minutes, so the mild hip fracture was definitely worth it. They are pretty close to the village, but Tegru doesn't want to risk flying on B, so he decides to just walk instead. Along the way, B starts pointing towards the stick in Tegru's hand, asking what it is. He tells her that it's apparently a branch of the Yggdrasil tree, and it was just sitting in the bag that God gave him, so he decides to just take it out and point it at stuff to see what happens. B seems to understand something about the stick, so she breathes out a cloud of magic onto it, awakening the stick's true form. Tegru has no idea how or why that worked, but before he can figure it out, he suddenly hears a loud growling noise coming from the forest, so he immediately gets himself ready for a fight. Just then, B flies off into the forest by herself, so Tegru is forced to chase after her until they eventually find an elf girl propped up against a tree. Tegru rushes over to aid her since he's worried that she might have been injured by a monster, but the girl tells him she's not hurt, she's just really hungry. She hasn't had anything to eat or drink for 3 days now, and she's on the verge of starving to death, so she begs Tegru to spare her some rations. He can't just leave her like this, so he reaches into his bag and gives her some water, as well as the lunch he packed for himself earlier. The girl's eyes light up the second she sees the food, and she wastes no time scarfing it all down in a matter of seconds. But now that she's no longer starving, Tegru has a few questions for her. For one, he wonders how the hell she has been starving out here for 3 days when the nearest town is barely a day's walk away. The girl admits that she was in a hurry and got lost on her way out here. But even so, it's common sense to carry at least a few days' worth of rations with you at all times, yet she literally brought nothing. The girl is a little embarrassed and tries thinking of a good excuse, but she gets way too close to Tegru in the process, and once he catches a whiff of her, he realizes she stinks. The girl tries to defend herself by telling him it's not her fault since she had to camp out here for days on end with no supplies, but that doesn't change the fact that she smells like manure right now. The girl gets up and tells Tegru that while she is thankful for him saving her, she thinks it was incredibly rude for him to say that she stinks, even if it was true. She then runs off to continue her journey, but she didn't ask for any directions and she still has no supplies, so he doesn't think she's going to make it very far. But that's not his problem to deal with, so he continues heading back to the city with B. They eventually make it out of the forest, and along the road, B notices a carriage approaching, so he stops to talk to the driver. The man notices his staff and asks Tegru if he is a sorcerer, but while he could definitely be one if he wanted to, Tegru wants to stick to peaceful jobs, so he tells the man he's just a gatherer who happens to have a staff. The man then asks him what he's doing all the way out here, so Tegru explains that he is heading towards Hormi village. The man is surprised to hear that he's heading there on foot since it's quite a long journey, but it's not like he had much of a choice. The driver offers to give him a ride back to the village if he would like, and Tegru appreciates the gesture, but he's pretty big, so he is worried that he might take up too much space in the carriage. But both the man and his family already aboard tell him there's nothing to worry about, so he goes around back and climbs in. Something Tegru notices recently is that ever since he came to this world, children seem to just naturally like him. He's not sure why, but it makes things easier for him since if the kids like him, then most adults will be nice to him as well. He thanks them once again for giving him a ride, but they say it's not a big deal since everyone in Tormi helps each other out whenever they are in trouble. Tegru appreciates their generosity, but he thinks they are being a little too trusting since he could have been a bandit for all they knew. However, they tell him they knew he was not a bandit because if he were a bad person, then this bell would have rung and they never would have offered him a ride. Tegru is amazed that bells can be enchanted with magic stones to detect whether someone is bad or not, and he wonders if he can make something like that for himself later. Just then, Yunin notices a strange sound coming from Tegru's jacket, so she asks him what it is, and he is forced to explain that he actually brought a rare monster with him. He was expecting the family to freak out a little at the mention of a monster, but they tell him that it's actually perfectly normal for adventurers to keep monsters as pets from time to time, so it doesn't bother them. In that case, there's no reason for Tegru to hide B any longer, so he tells her she can come out, but she had better not bite anyone. Once the kids see B, they are both overwhelmed by how cute she is, but Eliza and Palom are both more impressed by the fact that Tegru managed to tame a dragon cub. They ask him if he happens to be the Dragon Knight, but he says he just happened to find and hatch a dragon while he was out on a mission. Once it's time to take a break for the night, Tegru sets up his barrier and he assures the family that as long as the barrier remains up, no monsters will come anywhere near them. And even if something does try to attack them, B will be here to alert them before it gets too close. They are all glad to know that they are safe for the night, but they still need to do something about their dinner, so Eliza gets ready to start cooking. But before she does, Tegru asks her if she'd be willing to let him handle the meal prep for today. He reaches into his bag and pulls out all his pans, which amazes the kids since there's no way all that stuff should be able to fit in such a small sack. Takeru explains that his bag operates like an item box, so there's a lot more space on the inside than it seems, and it's really handy for gathering things. Once Takeru is done cooking, everyone digs in and they are all delighted by how delicious his food is, especially Paulum since he was sick of having to eat dried meat all the time. As the night drags on, they all begin to sing songs and dance to pass the time, and the kids even invite Takeru to join in. He never got to experience anything like this when he was back on Earth, since he'd always just spend the night alone in front of his TV, but eating with others is a lot more fun than he thought it would be. The next morning, Takeru wakes up and begins working on cleaning his scissors to keep himself busy until it's time to get back on the road. Poland tells him they can head out after they've had breakfast, but Takeru actually has a small favor he'd like to ask. He has never tried driving a carriage before, so he asks Poland to let him try, and he sees no issue with it. So he lets Takeru take the reins, and before long they arrive at the village. Takeru gets off the carriage and Poland thanks him for sharing his food, but Takeru says he should be the one thanking them since he didn't have to walk all the way back on his own. Poland and the others drive off afterwards, and as the short guard watches them leave, he says it must finally be spring. Takeru doesn't know what that's supposed to mean, so he asks the guard for an explanation, and he is informed that Poland does weaving for a living. He frequently travels to warmer regions for work, and the journey is always difficult for him and his family. Unable to hunt, they're left to survive on meager rations. That explains why he was so happy to taste Takeru's food, and learning how bad Poland has it makes Takeru realize how lucky he is to have an ability that allows him to gather materials. A little while later, Takeru heads back to Jerome's store to deliver the materials that he was asked to gather, and as a little test, Takeru slips one magic mithril ore he got from the dragon's den in with the regular mithril to see if Jerome is the kind of person to scam him. Jerome spends a long time examining the rocks, and he eventually comes to the conclusion that this one in particular must be a piece of magic mithril ore. He tells Takeru that a few of these contain enough magic to replace most of the magic stones in the kingdom, and Takeru feigns surprise even though he already knew that. Jerome tells him it's amazing that he was able to find something this valuable, but Takeru tries to downplay the achievement and says he just happened to come across it on his trip. Even if Takeru claims to have found it lying at his feet, Jerome says it still takes considerable skill to be able to find things like this, so he tells Takeru that he would be better off heading to the city of Belkame. It's much larger than this village, and as much as Jerome doesn't like the idea of letting talent like Takeru leave, he will be able to find a larger variety of items to buy and sell compared to what he would get here. He just asks that when Takeru eventually makes a name for himself, he send a few extra customers Jerome's way. Takeru doesn't actually intend on becoming famous or anything, but the idea of heading to the big city does intrigue him, so he decides to read about it once he gets back to the inn. There, he finds out that Belkame has an adventurers guild that brokers requests all across the country. The adventurers themselves are divided into combat, support, and various other roles, and since Takeru is in another world, he wants to try out adventuring and traveling the world for a while. He decides that he is going to go join the guild in Belkame, but before that, there are still a few things he needs to do in Tormy. He heads into town and first finds someone to process all the monsters he caught. And while he's waiting for that to be done, he spends the night partying with the villagers and enjoying a feast. The next morning, Takeru heads back to the butcher, and now that all of the monster parts have been processed, he has enough food and seasoning stock to last for the duration of his journey. The woman tells him it's going to be lonely around here without Takeru around, and a lot of the other villagers have been saying they want him to stay a little longer as well. Takeru says he will miss this place as well, but there are a lot of exciting places out there for him to visit and new people for him to meet, so he can't settle down here. The woman understands, so she says she won't push the matter any further, but before Takeru leaves, she wants to give him something extra. She hands him a bag and says she packed him a travel lunch. Actually, she packed him a ton of travel lunches, so it looks like Takeru isn't going to have to worry about food for a while. After that, he heads back to his room, and the only thing left to do is figure out what to use the magic mithril ore for. Jerome told him he couldn't afford to buy it, so Takeru has no idea what he's supposed to do with it now. It's too valuable for him to just toss out, but since it supposedly has a ton of magical energy inside it, Takeru wonders if he can use it to create something useful for the villagers since they've been so nice to him. Just then he notices his lamp on the table, and it gives him an idea, so he takes the magic stone and tries combining it with the lantern. It doesn't take long for him to figure out how to do it, and after a large flash, a magic item was created. The next morning, as Takeru was about to depart, the entire village came out to say goodbye to him. Takeru thanks them for everything they've done for him, and as his way of showing his appreciation, he made this for them. He tells everyone that it's a magic item that will create a barrier around the village to keep out any people with malicious intent, and while they are all grateful for his kindness, They wonder if it's really okay for them to take something so valuable. Takaru tells them it's fine since it's the least he can do to repay them. Plus, he wanted to make sure the village would still be in one piece in case he comes back to visit. Jerome is a little curious about what's powering the device, so he takes a look inside and sure enough, he finds the magic stone, which is worth a small fortune. He's about to say that they really can't accept a gift that's so expensive, but Takaru already ran out of the gate while he was talking, so there's no way he can return it now. While Takaru is walking on his way to Belkame, he takes a moment to enjoy the peaceful scenery. However, that peace doesn't last long because he soon encounters a random giant crab in the middle of the road. After the initial shock wears off, Takaru takes a look at the crab's stat and everything is pretty unremarkable. But as soon as Takaru sees that the crab is edible, he decides that he and B will be having seafood for dinner today. Takaru casts enhancement magic on himself in preparation for the fight. Before he could actually do anything, B suddenly flies ahead and hits the crab with a sonic scream that knocks it out cold. Takaru is impressed since he had no idea that B could do something like that, but the battle isn't over yet because two more crabs suddenly show up. Takaru thinks he's safe in the middle of the road since crabs can only move sideways, but he was horribly wrong since these crabs are able to move forward really fast. They both have him surrounded, so Takaru is about to be smushed, but before the crabs close in, B pulls Takaru into the air, causing them to smash into one another instead. Takaru thanks B for her quick thinking, but the fight still isn't over yet because the first crab just regained consciousness, and it mindlessly charges at Takaru, so he summons his staff and smacks the crab straight into the air, finally killing it. Now that all the crabs have been defeated, it's time for Takaru to start preparing them. So first, he uses hardening on his arm to turn it into a makeshift knife, and then he gets to work cutting off all the claws and legs. A few minutes later, he has prepared all the limbs for boiling, so he pulls out a giant pot and puts them all in. Don't ask where he got the giant pot though. He adds water and a bunch of salt, and after boiling for a few hours, the crab meat is finally ready, so he and B dig in. They both absolutely love the flavor of the crab meat, so from now on, Takaru plans to take down and eat as many monsters as possible so he can try all sorts of delicious meals. A few days later, Takaru and B arrive at the gates of the city of Belkame, and he is amazed by how magnificent the fortress walls are. He notices that there's a long line at the gate where inspections are being done, so he walks over to join the queue. But before it gets to his turn, he decides to disguise his magic bag since it would be bad if the guards found out he has infinite storage. Once it's Takaru's turn, he gets called into a separate room to meet with the guards, and while one goes through his belongings, the other asks him what business he has in Belkame. Takaru explains that he came here because he's interested in signing up at the Adventurers Guild, and the male guard can understand why since Belkame has the largest guild on the continent. He doesn't think Takaru is suspicious, but he still needs to do his job, so he tells him he's going to check him with avarice. Takaru has never heard of this avarice before, so he asks the guard what it does, and he explains that it basically lets them check if a person is suspicious or not. Takaru doesn't mind since it's either this or a full cavity search, so the guard uses the device to scan him, and after a few seconds, he says there's nothing out of the ordinary. Takaru is kind of curious about what the guard saw, so he uses his ability to scan the magic device, and he sees the stat window which showed the guard. It basically just says Takaru can use magic, and he's relieved that the laundry list of abilities that the god gave him don't show up on normal scans. The guards tell him he's good to go, but he does have one more question before Takaru leaves. It's not a big deal, but he's wondering why Takaru has the blessing of the dragons on his stat screen. Takaru explains that it's probably because of his pet, so he tells B to come out, and both guards are in awe of how cute she is. There are no rules against having pet dragons here, so Takaru is allowed to take B inside, but the guard tells him he's going to have to put some sort of tag on B as proof of ownership in case anything happens in the city. Takaru isn't sure what to use since he didn't bring a collar with him, but then he remembers that Poland's kids gave him a lucky charm a few days ago, so he takes it out of his bag and slides it onto B's tail. The guard says that's good enough, so now all that's left is to file a report telling the mayor that a dragon has entered the city, but Takaru doesn't have to worry about that. They return his bag and tell him that if he wants to get to the Adventurers Guild, then he can get there by going straight along the main road. As Takaru takes his first steps into the city, it is even more amazing than he thought it would be. Just then, B points to a big building at the end of the street, and that must be the Adventurers Guild, so he heads inside and takes a look around. A few moments later, a woman named Europa approaches Takaru, and she welcomes him to the Adventurers Guild. They are always happy to get new registrations, so she leads him over to the reception desk where Takaru is introduced to the receptionist Ariana. She asks him to fill out his name and current job on the form, and that sounds simple enough, but now that Takaru thinks about it, he doesn't know why he is able to understand this world's language at all. After filling out the form, Ariana asks Takaru if he has any combat experience, and Takaru informs her that he has taken out a griffin, a bunch of wolves, and a couple of crabs as well. That all sounds very impressive, but Ariana kind of thinks Takaru is making it up, so she asks if he has any proof of his kills. He says he does have proof, but it's pretty big, so he asks her if it's really alright for him to bring it out right here. Ariana doesn't think it will be that bad, so she tells Takaru to go ahead, but to her shock, he pulls out a giant crab and drops it right on her desk. The weight of the crab crushes Ariana's desk instantly, and Takaru realizes he may have messed up, but in his defense, he did warn her that it would be big. All the guild patrons gather around to see what all the commotion is about, and the guild master asks what's going on. Takaru says he just wanted to show Ariana his crab, and the guild master can see that, but he gets suspicious of the fact that Takaru has an item box, so he asks him where he got it. Takaru says he got it as a gift, and after using his ability, the guild master confirms that Takaru is telling the truth. The guild master has a scan ability similar to Takaru's, but instead of a stat screen, he just sees an aura around a person that tells him whether they have good or bad intentions, and Takaru seems fine, so there's no need to punish him for a simple mistake. He says they can appraise the crab and issue payment by the end of the day, but Takaru says he actually plans to eat the crab later, which shocks everyone in the guild. The crowd is starting to get even bigger, so Ariana says she will finish Takaru's registration in the room next door. Once she's at a new desk, she tells him that the crab definitely proved that he is a capable fighter, so she finishes up his registration and slides a guild armband over to him. She knows he deserves a higher rank, but according to the guild rules, all new members have to start at F rank. However, with his skills, he should be able to rank up in no time. The next day, Takaru tracks down the family of Balluri, the guy he found dead in the woods, so he can inform them of his passing and return a few of his belongings. Balluri's family is devastated, especially since they had told him not to go adventuring, but he insisted on doing it to pay for his father's medicine. Takaru can tell that the father is still very sick, and he feels bad about losing his son, so he wants to do something to help out. Afterwards, he heads to the guild to sell a bunch of herbs, and the clerk is thrilled by how large all the mushrooms and leaves are. Just then, Ariana comes around the corner looking for Takaru, and it looks like he's become quite popular in town lately because a ton of jobs were posted personally requesting Takaru. Takaru is happy to hear that people think so highly of him, but he doesn't have enough time to take on all of these jobs, so he tells her he will just take a few for now. After that, Takaru heads to the bathhouse to take a long and relaxing soak, and a few moments later, Clay walks in as well and takes a spot right next to Takaru. Takaru is surprised to see him here since he usually doesn't show up at this time, but he says it looks like it's going to rain soon, so he wanted to get a quick bath beforehand. Anyway, since Takaru is here, Clay asks him if he knows how to use healing magic since there are rumors going around that he healed a sick man in the slums for free a little while ago. Takaru admits that it's true, and Clay is surprised to hear that since most healers charge a huge fee. Now that Takaru thinks about it, he worries that the healers who charge money might resent him for undercutting their market, but the fact that that's Takaru's only concern here makes Clay laugh. He encourages Takaru to take the rank assessment test so he can rank up, but he says he doesn't really want to since he's happy with the way things are right now. Clay can tell that Takaru is a chill guy, but he warns him that he will eventually draw unwanted attention acting like that, so as he leaves, he encourages Takaru to learn a little more about the way the world works. Later on, Takaru delivers another set of herbs at the guild, and the clerk thanks him for his hard work, but he really wishes Takaru would consider ranking up since a high rank would be easy for him to attain. Takaru once again says he is happy where he is, and he doesn't intend on advancing any higher than F rank. Just then, the huge commotion breaks out in the guild because a horde of goblins has been spotted near the city. The guild master immediately sends out an order for all D rank and above adventurers to prepare for battle. He then asks the receptionist if there are any A rank adventurers available to join the fight, but unfortunately, most of them are already out on a mission, so the only A ranker left is Clay. The guild master is relieved that they will at least have the support of the Honorable Dragon King, so he asks Moosley to go inform Clay of the situation right away. Takaru sees all of this going on, and even though he could probably one-tap the entire goblin army, he's only F rank, so he couldn't care less about helping. However, the guild master is well aware of what Takaru is trying to pull here, so he singles him out and tells him he's coming on the mission too, whether he likes it or not. A little while later, once all the adventurers have been gathered, the guild master gives them a breakdown of how this operation is going to go. The front lines are on the southern Stavlaw Plains, and the goblins are likely going to head straight for Belkame from there. They can't let the goblins make it past the city wall, so the guildmaster tells them to intercept the goblins at the Zalwis River. Everyone seems hyped to defend the city, but Takaru really doesn't want to be here. Just then, two adventurers beside him notice that Takaru is F rank, so they ask why a weakling like him would be allowed to join a mission like this. Just then, the guildmaster comes over, and he's not exactly sure why, but all of his staff members have been singing Takaru's praises non-stop, so he figured it would be a good idea to bring him along. He's technically not allowed to force an F-ranker to fight since the Union would be breathing down his neck for it. But there's nothing stopping him from asking Takaru to gather valuable drops on the battlefield, though. The Guildmaster then walks away, and Muesli apologizes to Takaru because she has no idea why the Guildmaster would force an F-ranker to join a fight, but regardless, she promises to do her best to support him out there. Takaru has no idea what she's talking about, so Muesli explains that she knows how to use a bit of healing magic and will be helping out as a medic. Takaru can see why Muesli would be asked to help, but with how excited she is for a deadly battle, he gets the feeling that something is going to go horribly wrong. A little while later, Takaru arrives at the outpost with Muesli, and the second they get there, she gets scared by a bird and starts clinging onto Takaru's arm. He asks her if she could let go of him, but Muesli is too terrified to release her grip. She keeps insisting that she's not scared at all, but Takaru isn't blind. He tells her that they are at a rear outpost, far removed from any of the actual fighting, so the chance of her running into an actual monster is really low. He tells her there's nothing wrong with being scared, because even the bravest of warriors experience fear, so she just needs to do her best with the abilities at her disposal. Hearing Takaru's speech cheered Muesli up, so she promises to do the best she can and runs off into one of the tents. A moment later, Clay comes out, and he finds it amusing that Takaru just gave a speech on how important it is to fight when he was trying so hard to avoid coming to the battlefield earlier. Takaru sees the irony in his statements, but he says he just doesn't like getting involved in trouble unnecessarily. And speaking of avoiding fights, Takaru is surprised to see Clay at the rear since he thought he would be out on the front lines with the others. Clay admits that some old scars started acting up, so his body isn't working as well as it usually does. Takaru asks if he's talking about those scars he saw on Clay's back when they were at the bathhouse. Clay freezes up for a moment, expecting Takaru to scorn him for having such shameful scars, but he doesn't see what the big deal is. Clay explains that scars on the back are a blemish on a warrior's pride because they mean you were injured while running away from an opponent, but Takaru doesn't think there's anything shameful about it. You can tell that Clay got those scars while trying to protect someone, and even though he was badly injured, he still managed to survive, so that's something you should be proud of. Just then, the two hear the low rumble of hundreds of footsteps approaching. Clay realizes that the Guildmaster's defensive formation on the front lines must have been breached and the enemy is approaching, so they need to prepare for a fight. Clay grabs a spear and tells Takaru he's heading out to intercept them. And even though his scars are still causing him a lot of pain, he vows that he will protect Takaru even if his body breaks. Takaru tries telling Clay he really doesn't need to do that, but he's already long gone. He then looks over at the tent and sees Muesli in the middle of healing the wounded adventurer, and seeing her try so hard despite her fear, even when the enemy is approaching, makes him feel bad for trying to take the easy way out. Here and now, he decides to do everything within his power to make sure everyone makes it home safely, so he casts a barrier around the outpost to keep Muesli and the other healers out of danger, and then heads to the front lines to confront the goblins. Out on the front lines, the adventurers are all fighting for their lives to keep the goblins at bay, but at this rate, it will only be a matter of time before the goblins invade the city. However, all of a sudden, Takaru comes running out onto the battlefield and punches one of the goblins so hard that it is sent flying into a rock pillar. It kind of freaks Takaru out to be fighting humanoid monsters, but he doesn't have time to think about the ethics of the situation, so he asks B to take out the rest for him. B flies into the air and uses lightning magic to fry all the goblins in the area at once. Now that everyone is safe, Takaru goes to check on them and asks what happened. Diego explains that their formation was holding up well initially, but at one point a high-level goblin sergeant showed up, and after that, things went downhill fast. Thankfully, Clay showed up just in time to save them from the goblin sergeant and drove it back, but the rest of them got separated from him in all the chaos, so they have no idea where he is or if he's alright. Takaru goes out looking for Clay, and near the forest we see him fighting for his life as he is swarmed by goblins. He manages to take a few of them out with his spear, but his scars still hurt really badly, and the pain brings him to his knees, so the goblins try to take advantage of that and stab him from behind. However, before they could do so, Takaru comes to Clay's rescue and electrocutes them to death. Clay is shocked to see Takaru and tells him to leave because it's dangerous here, but Takaru reminds him that he's the one with the crippling injury, so he shouldn't be pushing himself so hard. Just then, the two hear the sound of the goblin sergeant approaching. It lunges at the two of them, but Takaru and Clay jump out of the way in time. The safest option right now would be to retreat, but there's no way they'll be able to outrun the goblin sergeant. Despite the incredible amount of pain he is feeling right now, Clay takes a battle stance and says he will hold the goblin off long enough for Takaru to run away because no matter what, he refuses to let his friend die in a place like this. Takaru is touched by Clay's resolve, so he asks him if those scars on his back hold any sentimental value to him. Clay thinks that's a weird question to ask mid-battle. The only thing the scars do is remind him of his past failures, so he despises them with all his heart. Takaru assumes that means he wouldn't mind them being erased, and before Clay has a chance to ask him what he's talking about, Takaru reaches into his bag and splashes Clay with some of Vol's magic water. He then casts full healing magic on Clay to get rid of his scars, but he may have had some unintended side effects because while it did get rid of the scars, it also forced Clay to evolve and turn him black. Takaru has no idea what just happened, and neither does Clay. But not only is the pain from his scars gone, he also feels stronger than ever before for some reason. He decides to test out his new strength by attacking the goblins all by himself, and in a matter of seconds, he has wiped them all out without so much as breaking a sweat. Later that night, Clay heads to Takaru's room when he's back to normal now, but he can still feel immense energy smoldering within his body, so he demands to know exactly what Takaru did to him earlier today. Takaru explains that he just used some magic water from the ancient dragon as a catalyst and cast healing magic. Clay is confused, so he asks Takaru how he knows an ancient dragon, and he explains that Vol is B's father, which kind of means B is also an ancient dragon. Clay sits down and takes a moment to process all the information he just learned. He's grateful for what Takaru did for him, but no ordinary person would have been capable of such a feat, so Clay asks him who he really is. Takaru realizes he may have said way too much, but then again, the god never told him he had to keep his identity a secret, so there's no reason to hide it from a trusted friend. He tells Clay that he is from another world, and Clay is stunned in place for a moment because he can't tell if Takaru is messing with him or not. Takaru sits him down and explains everything that's happened regarding his reincarnation, and Clay still finds it hard to believe, but considering all the impossible things Takaru has already done, it doesn't actually sound too strange. Clay promises to keep Takaru's origins a secret, but he tells him he needs to be more careful about how he uses his power since altering someone's body is a big deal. Her name is Ribble. She's the one in charge of the shop. He asks her if she has any gatherer scissors in stock since his are worn out, but unfortunately, she tells him she doesn't sell those. On the bright side, she does know a great blacksmith who could make some scissors for Takaru, but he's waiting to fetch a few materials in exchange. Takaru says he is willing to listen to the details of the job, so Ribble begins leading him towards her boss's workroom. However, as they are walking down the halls, Takaru happens to spot a group of blacksmiths hard at work in the forge. He thinks their work is really impressive, and Ribble agrees with him, which is why she wants to become a talented blacksmith and forge a sword fit for a hero one day. They eventually arrive at the boss's room, and Ribble tells her boss that she was thinking of having Takaru gather some of the Ildra ore that's so hard to find so they can make the sword, but the boss immediately refuses because he says there's no way he's sending a gatherer down into the mines. Ribble tells him he could at least give it a try, and the two start arguing over it, but Takaru has no idea what Ildra ore even is. The boss says the reason he doesn't want to send a gatherer down to the mines is that it's always crawling with monsters, and there have been rumors lately that there are demons down there as well, so he can in good faith send Takaru down to face those creatures. Ribble admits that there has been a recent drop in people going to the mines, but the boss guesses she didn't tell Takaru about that part. He tells her that a smith who is willing to risk other people's lives for personal gain has no business holding a hammer, and Ribble realizes she was wrong, so she apologizes to Takaru and tells him he can forget about the whole thing. However, he still seems pretty interested despite the dangers involved, so he asks if Ildra ore is really the only ore suitable for making their sword. Ribble confirms it, so Takaru offers to gather the ore from the mine in exchange for having a special pair of scissors forged. The boss asks Takaru if he was paying attention when they mentioned that there were monsters down there, but he says he can handle anything that's down there, so they don't need to worry about him. As proof, he pulls out one of the crab claws he still carries around with him. And this is a monster that even B-rank adventurers would struggle with, so the boss realizes that Takaru might actually be able to handle it. Takaru sets out immediately for the Ryuhai mines, and along the way, the others in the carriage start talking about how strange it is that all the poisonous herbs around in the area disappeared overnight. Takaru gets concerned because he thinks it might be his fault for overdoing it with the gathering, but he dismisses the idea immediately after. A little while later, the carriage drops him off, and he realizes he is near a horse farm, so he goes to take a look inside. There he happens to spot that elf girl from before, and she seems to be having an argument with the farm owner because she asked for a white horse that can gallop across the sky, but the farmer is showing her a giant raven instead. The farmer tells her that around here a horse is more of a category than a name, so anything that can carry cargo is classified as a horse, whether it is actually a horse or just a raven. The elf realizes this is her fault for not being more specific about her request, so she apologizes for making such a fuss about it. The farmer tells her it's not a big deal, but if what she's looking for is a white Pegasus, he tells her she'd have better luck searching in the Dwarven Kingdom, so she decides to start heading there immediately with no preparation. Takaru continues his journey, and as he is passing through the forest, he realizes that there are a bunch of valuable ingredients all over the place. He even found a patch of moonmag grass, so he spends the next few minutes gathering some. However, just as he is about to leave, he hears a familiar growling sound coming from the corner, and when he gets to check it out, he finds the elf slumped against a tree and on the verge of dying from hunger. Again, he gives her some food and water, and she is very grateful for the help, so she extends her hand for a handshake. However, she still smells absolutely awful, and Takaru refuses to be subjected to the foul stench any longer, so he uses clean on her. She introduces herself as Velvereta Brolita, and she thanks Takaru for his kindness towards her both now and back then. Takaru says there's no need to thank him and begins walking away, but Brolita stops him because she wants to pay him back. Takaru says he wasn't helping her expecting to receive a reward, but in that case, Brolita says she will accompany him on his journey to help out as much as she can. Takaru tells her she really doesn't need to do that, but she insists, so he decides to just let her do what she wants. Over the next few hours, Takaru spends his time gathering more herbs from the forest, and Brolita does her best to help, but she keeps grabbing a bunch of useless stuff. A little while later, it's time for them to set up camp, so Brolita asks him if she should go grab some firewood for him. Takaru says he doesn't need her since he already has fire magic stones to use instead. However, Brolita tells him that it's important to leave traces of a campfire on paths like this since it will show other travelers that this is a safe place to camp. Takaru realizes she has a good point, so Brolita heads off into the woods, and a little while later, she returns with a massive log over her shoulder. Takaru tells her they can't use something this big as firewood, but Brolita says she's not done yet. She throws the log into the air, and she then takes out her blades, slicing the log into dozens of smaller pieces in one go. Takaru is really impressed since he didn't realize Brolita was so skilled, but he is even more amazed by the fact that her weapons are A rank because this is his first time seeing something ranked so highly. That night, Takaru cooks some soup, and as soon as Brolita tastes it, she is astonished because she has never had anything that tastes this good before. While they eat, she asks him if he is heading to the Dwarf Kingdom as well, and Takaru explains that he took on a job to collect some Ildra ore from the Ryuhai mines there. As for Brolita, she says she is traveling in search of a white Pegasus because it is her sister's greatest wish and she wants to see it fulfilled. That said, she has once again feasted on Takaru's food, and her debt to him has grown even larger, so she must repay him somehow. In that case, Takaru asks if he can hire her as his bodyguard because there are a lot of things about adventuring that he still isn't familiar with. She tells him she would be happy to act as his bodyguard, and for the first time, Takaru notices that when she isn't nearly starving herself to death, Brolita actually looks really nice. However, that night, he barely gets any sleep because Bee and Brolita snore way too loudly. The next day, they continue their journey until they can see the Dwarven Kingdom from across the river. And once they arrive, they immediately head to a tavern to get themselves some local food. They are served some meat wrapped in jupes, a Dwarven specialty, and as soon as Takaru tries it, he absolutely loves the flavor. Brolita says this is just as good as her friend told her it would be, and Takaru asks what kind of friend she is referring to, so she tells him it was a lizardman she knows. He says that's a coincidence because he also happens to know a lizardman. In fact, that lizardman has been sitting right behind him this entire time. Takaru is surprised to see Clay here, and Clay asks why Takaru left town without even giving him a heads up beforehand. He explains the whole situation to Clay, and Clay understands the situation, but Takaru's rank is still too low to officially accept a job like gathering Ildra ore from the mines, so he won't be able to report this to the guild for evaluation. He asks Takaru if he's at least getting a good reward out of it, and he explains that Groose has agreed to make him an amazing set of scissors in exchange for the ores. Clay doesn't know what to say because that's nowhere near a fair trade-off, but Takaru insists that a good pair of scissors is essential for a gatherer. If Takaru is really okay with only receiving a pair of scissors, then Clay has no reason to try and convince him otherwise, but he says he would like to accompany Takaru on his mission. He was planning on heading into the city soon anyway so he could get his spear repaired, so he tells Takaru to think of it as a minor detour. And before Takaru could refuse the offer, Brolita suddenly spoke up and said Clay could become Takaru's bodyguard as well, so it looks like he's going to be stuck with them for a while. The next morning, they all head to the entrance of the city of Vosrol, and there's a long line outside, so it looks like it's going to take a while for them to get in. However, Takaru then notices Clay talking with the guards over there, and a few minutes later, they are allowed to skip the entire line and head right in since Clay is so well known. Once they are inside, the guard tells Clay that the king is requesting an audience with him, and now Takaru is surprised because he had no idea Clay knew the king of the Dwarven Kingdom. Clay says it's a long story, but the guard says it's actually pretty simple. Clay once saved them from the Thunder King Zengam, and ever since he has been revered as a hero. However, Clay explains that he didn't actually do anything. The dwarves are people who are skilled when it comes to crafting weapons, but they couldn't wield those same weapons to protect themselves, so they often ended up being forced into servitude by a demon. Then one day, Clay happened to be walking by, and as soon as the demon spotted him, it immediately ran away because it didn't want to fight, which is why the dwarves see him as their hero. They even created a statue in his honor, but they apparently aren't very good at sculpting because it looks more like a T-Rex than Clay. A little while later, Clay and the others head to the castle to meet King Zeph, and Clay immediately demands to know whose idea it was to make a statue of him that looks like that, and Zeph jokingly says he just thought it would look cool that way. Takaru can tell that Clay and Zeph seem to be really close, but he needs to interrupt their banter because he has a letter of introduction he needs to give the king. It's from Grusas, and it is basically asking for permission for Takaru to head into the mines. The king says he normally wouldn't have a problem with it, but a few months ago the mine became a den for countless demons, so he is worried about Takaru's safety. He asks him if he's sure he still wants to go in despite knowing the risks involved, and Takaru confirms it. So the king tells him that he and his friends have permission to go in and uncover the truth behind the demon infestation. Clay immediately says he understands, but Takaru is left speechless because investigating demons wasn't meant to be on his agenda today. They eventually head to the entrance of the mine, and the local guild's head receptionist opens the gate to let them in. Takaru creates a light spell to illuminate the area, but from what he can see, there aren't many ores out here, so he asks the guide if they can go a little deeper. The guide agrees, but all of a sudden, B senses something approaching, so Takaru uses his scan ability and realizes that they are being attacked by two giant spiders. Clay steps up and uses his spear to stab the first one through the mouth, and while he does that, Takaru uses magic to stun the second one in place, buying enough time for Brolita to slice it to pieces, so the spider problem has been dealt with. The further into the mine they head, the stronger the magical energy feels, and Takaru is starting to notice traces of Ildra ore in the walls, but they aren't big enough for what he needs. Just then, he notices something buried deep in the wall, so he launches some explosion magic at it, exposing a massive ore vein of Idrite. It's not Ildra ore, but it is even more rare and valuable, so the guide tells him that this is an amazing find. However, just then, V warns Takaru that something is approaching, and the guide's eyes go white as he realizes it is a demon. After getting a good look at it, Takaru tells everyone to stand back because he intends to handle this one by himself. But not because he hates demons or anything, it's because the demon in question happens to be a crab and he and B can't wait to eat it. Takaru asks B to provide some cover fire while he rushes in to attack, but he reminds B not to use any fire or lightning attacks since they wouldn't want to destroy any of the juicy crab meat. B uses a sonic scream to disorient the crab while Takaru runs up and bashes it over the head with his staff. However, this one is much more durable than the others he's dealt with in the past, so he gets smacked across the face, but he's not giving up yet. The crab tries to stomp on him, but Takaru manages to roll out of the way in time, and B uses the opportunity to freeze the crab's leg in place. This gives Takaru an idea, so he forms several ice needles and launches them all at the crab, freezing it solid. Brolite is amazed by how easily Takaru was able to defeat the crab monster, but Clay, on the other hand, is furious and asks why Takaru chose to fight that thing on his own. Takaru says he just got a little carried away and he didn't want Clay or Brolite helping because he was worried that if they used their dirty weapons to attack it, the crab meat would end up being ruined. Clay is shocked to learn that Takaru actually plans to eat that thing, but that aside, he reminds Takaru that he is here as his bodyguard and that means it's his job to fight and protect him at all times, so he should learn to rely on his friends more often. Takaru didn't really need any help taking the crab monster down, but he understands Clay's point, so he apologizes and promises to rely on him more often. Clay is glad to hear it, so he says they should probably start hauling the crab monster out of here if he plans to eat it. A little while later, Takaru and the others have moved the crab's body and are currently busy mining. They've already gathered all the gems in the area, but Takaru says there's a good chance they might hit an even larger vein if they dig a little deeper. The guide is extremely grateful to Takaru because not only did he take care of the demon that had been terrorizing this place, he also found a new ore vein for them, and he doesn't know how they could ever repay him. Later on, Takaru and the others head back to the castle to meet with the king, and there Zambo informs him of Takaru's exploits. The king is amazed by everything Zambo tells him, and as proof of his accomplishment, Zambo asks Takaru to show the king the crab monster he caught. Takaru asks him if he's sure about that, but the king seems like he wants to see it, so he opens his item box and sets the crab down on the ground. The king is amazed by how large the monster is, and he tells Takaru he deserves a reward for doing such a good job taking it down. In that case, Takaru asks if he can take the crab's body as his reward, and the king is confused by such a strange request, but he has no problem with it. A few minutes later, Takaru and the others walk out of the castle, and Takaru and B can hardly stop drooling over themselves at the thought of all the delicious crab they'll be eating soon. Additionally, its hard shell will make a good base material for the scissors Takaru asked for, so this trip worked out really well for him. To make things even better, the next day, the king prepares a white Pegasus for Brawlite as a reward since he heard that she was looking for one. But now that I think about it, she really didn't do much while she was here. The king also had Clay's spear fixed up, and he is quite pleased with how it turned out. Brawlite says she has to return home since the Pegasus is a gift from her sister, and she can't express how grateful she is to Takaru for everything he has done. He tries telling her it's not a big deal, but she insists that she will find a way to pay him back even if it takes her the rest of her life. Later on, Takaru and Clay return to the guild, and he is greeted by Ariana as soon as he walks in. She's glad to see that he's back, but she's surprised to see Clay with him, so she asks if they formed a party together or something. Takaru is about to tell her that they just happen to run into each other, but Clay cuts him off and says they have indeed formed a party. Ariana is excited to hear that, and before Takaru could tell her that they haven't actually formed a party, she's already run off to inform the guild master. Takaru then turns to Clay and asks him why he would say something like that, but Clay says there's no harm in it. Besides, he is already well aware that Takaru isn't an ordinary human, and he has a tendency to get himself into trouble, so Clay thinks it would be a good idea to keep an eye on him. As much as Takaru doesn't like being strong-armed into things, he admits that the idea of having Clay as a teammate may not be so bad, so the two of them sit down to chat, and they eventually come to an agreement, forming the Black Azure Dragon Party. Afterwards, Takaru heads over to the smithing shop to deliver the materials he gathered, and as soon as the boss sees all the pure Ildrite Takaru gathered, he is left speechless. Takaru starts worrying that something might be wrong since he thought bringing the pure Ildrite would be better than the ordinary Ildrite ore, but now he's not so sure. He asks them if they can finish the project they planned using the Ildrite ore, and both Ribble and Gassus shed tears of joy because they never thought they'd get their hands on such pure Ildrite. Takaru is glad that they seem happy with what he brought, although he wasn't expecting them to be so moved by it. After Ribble and Gassus stop crying, they turn to Takaru and tell him that while they are grateful, with this many stones, there's no way they have enough money to pay him for the value of the Ildrite he brought. However, Takaru says that they don't need to worry about giving him money since all he wants is a custom pair of scissors that only he can use. But before that, he wants them to take this Ildrite and use it to make the best sword ever so they can win the sword crafting contest. Half a month later, Takaru is in the tavern enjoying a nice mug of beer when all of a sudden he is interrupted by Wade. Wade says someone important is looking for him, and they left this letter for Takaru, asking him to have a meeting with them. Clay takes a look at the letter and recognizes it as the crest of the house of Lusilvach. Wade explains that the letter is from the lord of this territory, and Takaru doesn't like the sound of that because it seems like it would be a huge hassle to deal with. He starts thinking of ways to back out of the meeting, but Wade assures him that while the lord in question may be a noble, he isn't unpleasant, so there should be no problem with Takaru meeting him. Takaru takes Wade's word for it and opens the letter to see what's written inside. The letter is a formal request for Takaru and Clay to visit the lord's manor so he can bestow honors upon them. Clay is surprised that his name is listed in the letter as well, but Wade explains that the lord probably heard about Takaru and Clay forming a party and wanted to invite both of them. The idea of receiving honors sounds nice and all, but Takaru gets the feeling that this is just an excuse to get him to show up. Clay agrees and says it's likely that the lord just wants to see B since it's rare for a baby dragon to be spotted, but that gets Takaru worried because he doesn't want to risk having the lord take B away from him. Wade assures him that the lord isn't that kind of person, and he doesn't have the authority to seize someone's pet anyway. Takaru still has his reservations, but he eventually agrees to the meeting, so he and Clay get in the noble's carriage and start heading for the manor. As they ride to the manor, Takaru notices that a lot of people seem to be staring, but Clay says that's normal since it's not often that someone gets summoned to the lord's manor. Takaru asks why, so Clay explains that if the lord decides to support you, your entire career as an adventurer changes for the better, so almost all adventurers dream of an opportunity like this. As they arrive at the manor, Takaru is amazed by how grand the building is, and at the front door, they are introduced to Raymond, a head butler of this manor. He leads them into the building, and right past the entrance, Takaru finds a row of maids lined up to greet him, and he is fascinated by how organized everything is. As they head towards the staircase, a man happens to be passing by, but instead of greeting the guests, he gives them the side eye and acts like they don't even exist. Takaru decides to ignore him since the disrespect doesn't really bother him. But a moment later, a little girl comes running down the stairs and begins demanding that he hand over B because she wants him. Takaru coldly tells her that's not going to happen, and the girl seems genuinely shocked that Takaru doesn't want to give her his pet. She starts talking about how dragons are noble creatures, and as such, she is the only one who deserves to have B, but she's saying it like she rehearsed a script. So while she's talking, Takaru takes a look at her stat window. He finds out that her name is Tairis, and she is the Lord's daughter, but she doesn't seem like a bad person, so he gets down on one knee and asks her why she thinks she deserves to take B. Tairis becomes a little flustered and explains that Bernard told her that all adventurers are lowlifes, and if you tell them what to do, they will be forced to obey. That explains a lot about Tairis' behavior, and he realizes Bernard must be filling her head with nonsense, but he has no idea who that is. For now, he explains to Tairis that B is a part of his family, so there's nothing in the world that would make him willing to give B up. After hearing Takaru call B a part of his family, it finally clicks for her that asking him to hand over B is the same as someone telling her to abandon her family, and she would never agree to that. Takaru asks her why she wanted a dragon so badly in the first place, so Tairis explains that she wanted to show it to her mother because it is one of her greatest wishes, but thinking about it makes her sad. Just then, a man comes over and he notices that Tairis looks sad, so he asks her what's wrong. Tairis turns to the man and calls him father, so Takaru realizes that he must be the Lord, and he is honestly surprised because he was expecting a bald, fat man or something. The Lord introduces himself as Belmonent, and after settling down for some tea with Takaru and Clay, he apologizes for his daughter's rude behavior earlier. Takaru says it's not a problem, and Clay asks Belmonent why he summoned them here, so he explains that it's about his wife, Mulateria. He explains that his wife has been bedridden for half a year now, and he recently heard rumors of how Takaru healed a frail and sickly man overnight, so he was hoping Takaru would be able to do something for his wife with his power. Takaru is aware that his magic is strong enough to heal most ailments, but the last time he did that, he ended up evolving Clay, so he's worried about what might happen if he tries it on Mulateria. Belmonent goes on to explain that the reason Tairis wanted Takaru's dragon was because in a few days, she will have to return to her school in the royal capital, and she thought that if she left an adorable creature by her mother's side, then maybe it would lift her spirits. She can be a bit misguided at times, but deep down, she's a good kid, and the story has both Clay and B in tears, so Takaru eventually agrees to help, but he's still worried that this might end up causing trouble for him down the line. Belmonent is overjoyed to hear that Takaru is willing to help, so he leads into his wife's room and tells her that he has brought someone who might be able to cure her. First of all, Takaru scans her, and when he takes a look at her status window, he realizes this is worse than he had thought. I don't know how, but she's got a laundry list of life-threatening diseases. To name a few, she has severe cataracts, anemia, kidney and liver poisoning, and that's just the first few. It's a miracle that she's still alive right now, but he should be able to heal most of her ailments. However, there's something here called Ivor poisoning, and he has never heard of that before, so he's not sure his magic will be able to take care of it. Either way, he won't know until he tries, so he asks Belmonent if he's willing to entrust the life of his wife to him, and both he and Mulateria agree to put their faith in Takaru. Clay asks him if he intends to use the same technique he used to heal him back then, but Takaru says he can't since it puts a lot of strain on the body, and in Mulateria's current condition, there's no way she'd be able to handle that, so he's going to try something different. But first, he needs to do something about this dark and gloomy room, and since all the windows are closed in order to protect Mulateria's sensitive eyes, he's going to start with that. He puts his hand over her face and casts healing magic, but if he uses too much at once, he could accidentally hurt her, so he needs to be really careful. Once he is done, he asks Mulateria to slowly open her eyes, and as she does so, she is stunned at her realization that she can actually see again. Takaru is glad to hear that because it means she doesn't need the room to be so dark, so he takes out his staff and uses cleaning magic to get rid of all the dust and open the windows to let fresh sunlight in. Mulateria is overjoyed to be able to bask in the sun without her eyes burning, and it's all thanks to Takaru. But as much as he'd like to take care of her other ailments next, he can't right now, so he asks to speak with Belmonent in private for a moment. Belmonent agrees to go with him, and once they are alone, Takaru informs him that his wife has something called Ivor poisoning, and from what he knows, she got it from ingesting Ivor toxins. Belmonent is about to say there's no way Mulateria would be careless enough to eat that toxin, but then he realizes that someone must have been poisoning her, and he can't believe he never noticed. He asks if there's anything he can do, but since Takaru has no idea how Ivor toxins work, he can't heal her. He asks Belmonent if he can get his hands on an antidote, but he says it is impossible. Ivor toxin is an ancient forbidden poison that was lost to time, and as such, the antidote recipe was also lost to time, so no one knows how to make it anymore. However, Belmonent does know where they might be able to find some clues, so he pulls out all the old record books in the library and explains that these contain notes from all the previous lords, so they might be able to find some information regarding the Ivor toxin in here. But there's one small problem. All the books are written in an ancient language that no one has been able to decipher for decades. However, thanks to Takaru's translation skill, he's able to understand the writing without much trouble, but reading all these books to find information on the Ivor poison would take ages, so he wishes he could search for keywords or something to make it easier. Just then, he comes up with the idea to modify his search skill and use it to identify the book that contains information on the Ivor poison. And yes, if search is so flexible, he could probably just use it to find the Ivor poison directly, but he didn't think of that. After activating his search, one of the books lights up, so he flips through the pages and eventually finds a section that contains information about the poison. It's the diary of a boy named Pola Pola, and it talks about how he randomly came across a field of Ivor flowers near a lake with a horse rock nearby, and Clay happens to know where that lake is. He saw it on one of his journeys to a small village, so he points to it on a map and tells the others that the village is called Asheth. Belmont realizes that Asheth is in the Venone region, and that's outside the Lusilevich territory, so it would take at least 5 days of travel to get there. And if that's the case, Takaru says he will leave immediately since there's no time to waste. As the horses are prepared for Takaru's departure, Bernard watches from the windows with a look of contempt on his face, and as for Takaru, he is next to one of the castle walls, setting down some magic crystals. Belmont comes over to find him and asks what he's doing, so Takaru explains that he was just setting up a little safeguard, since there's a chance that someone might try to harm Muleteria while he's gone. Just then, Teres comes running over to see Takaru because she wanted to apologize for the way she acted earlier. He came here to save her mother, yet she acted so rudely towards him for no reason and she feels terrible about it. However, Takaru tells her that what's important is that she was able to recognize that she was wrong and correct her behavior. It's a very important skill to be able to realize that you might be wrong about something, so Teres is well on her way to living a full and rich life. From now on, he asks Teres to think things through for herself before acting, and she promises not to make the same mistake again. There's one last thing he wants to say before he leaves, so he tells Teres that while he's gone, a certain individual might try telling her things like Takaru is an enemy, or that he is deceiving her, and if that happens, he wants Teres to avoid giving an immediate answer and to instead go talk to her father about it first. Teres promises to keep that in mind, so Takaru and Clay head out, and to make the journey as quick as possible, he casts speed-boosting magic on the horses. Over the next few days, the two make their way over to the village of Asheth, but when they finally arrive, they find a barren wasteland instead. Last time Clay was here, this place was a lush farming village, but it looks like there hasn't been any rain here for a long while, so Takaru is starting to worry that the lake they are looking for might have dried up already. Clay doesn't think that's going to be much of an issue since lakes don't usually dry up so quickly, but when they finally make it to the lake, while it doesn't seem to have dried out, the water looks kind of funky. Takaru takes a look at it, and from what he can tell, it looks like the water has been contaminated, and the person responsible definitely did it intentionally. Just then, Takaru and Clay are cornered by a group of villagers, and they look rather sickly, but they are determined to defend their village, so they demand to know what Takaru and Clay are doing here. Takaru realizes that the villagers are just trying to protect their home, so he calmly explains that he and Clay are adventurers from Belkame, and they came here on a mission to gather a rare material. The villagers seem skeptical, so they ask Takaru and Clay to prove that they really are adventurers, and Clay shows them his A-rank armband as proof. The villagers now realize that they really are adventurers, so they drop their hoes, but as Takaru is asking if they have any useful information to give him, he notices one of them fall to the ground, and as he goes to check on the boy, he realizes he seems way too light for a growing child. He turns to the adults and asks if they've been getting enough food to eat recently, but the reality of the situation is much worse than he thought. The villagers explain that roughly 10 months ago, the water in their lake suddenly became cursed, so they couldn't drink from it anymore. And the same thing also happened with their well, leaving them with no source of water for their people or crops. However, all of a sudden, a merchant named Ingach showed up, and he offered to help them in exchange for a special flower that grows by the lake. The location of that flower is a village secret, so they couldn't just tell him where it was, but they were desperate, so they ended up making a deal with him anyway. In exchange for one Ivor flower a month, Ngachi offered to give them 60 barrels of water, but that water wasn't enough for them to drink and grow crops at the same time, so they have been slowly starving out here for months. After everything the villagers have told Takaru, it is clear to him that Ngachi is behind this whole thing, so he tells them that that man is definitely evil. The villagers can't believe it since they thought Ngachi was just trying to help them out, but Takaru points out that when he was inspecting the lake earlier, he found signs that suggest that the lake was deliberately contaminated. Furthermore, it's awfully convenient that Ngachi happened to show up right after the lake was contaminated, and even if that was just a coincidence, anyone who wants to be paid with a harmful toxin is suspicious. The village chief is mortified by the realization that Ngachi has been using them all along, and Takaru is enraged by all the suffering that merchant has caused. Not only is he likely involved in the poisoning of Muleteria, but he also practically destroyed this village and caused the children here to go hungry just so he could get his hands on the Iver flower. Takaru swears that he won't let Ingachi get away with this, but first he needs to take care of the villagers, so he asks B to fly into the air and use some spirit magic. B understands what Takaru is trying to do, so he flies into the sky and uses magic to form rain clouds over the village. It soon begins raining, providing the villagers with enough clean water to last for a while, but he's not done yet. He then uses his clean spell to clean up all the villagers since they haven't had any water to bathe in for months. And finally, he uses repair magic to restore all their houses. He also pulls out a giant pot and cooks a meal for the villagers since they haven't had a decent meal in a long time, and the village chief is extremely grateful. The kids in the village have really taken a liking to Takaru, so they offer to show him their secret hideout in the woods. Takaru goes along with them, and they end up leading him to an old storage house with a bunch of lettuce fruit stored in here. Takaru is surprised to see so much fruit in storage when the village was starving before he arrived, but the kids tell him it's way too salty for them to eat normally, and they didn't have any water to dilute it with, so it was practically useless. Takaru decides to give it a try, and as soon as he tastes it, his eyes light up because while it may not be fit for regular consumption, he could probably turn this into soy sauce. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, an alarm suddenly goes off, and as soon as Tiaris hears it, she takes off running because she knows what it means. Before Takaru left, he set up a barrier around Mulatiria's room, and he explained that it would sound an alarm if anyone approached her with malicious intent, so that must mean someone is currently trying to kill her mother. Once Tiaris arrives at her mother's room, she finds Bernard at the door, and she finally understands what's going on. Personally, I wouldn't wait to hear what he has to say, but Tiaris finds it hard to believe that Bernard would betray her like this, so she asks him if he is really trying to kill her mother. Bernard completely denied it, but Tiaris points out that the barrier Takaru set up would only go off if it sensed malicious intent, so he must have been planning to do something bad to Mulatiria. Bernard tries to trick Tiaris by telling her she can't believe anything that ignorant adventurer tells her because he's just trying to scam them for as much money as possible, but Tiaris doesn't fall for it. Her father soon arrives and he can see exactly what's going on here, but since Bernard is insisting that he is innocent, Belmonte decides to give him a fair trial. Bernard's defense is that Takaru must have been lying about the barrier detecting malicious intent, but Belmonte finds that hard to believe when Takaru was able to improve Mulatirius so quickly. Still, if Bernard insists that he didn't have any bad intentions when he approached Mulatiria's room, then he can prove it right now by drinking the special water he intended to give her. Bernard begins to panic because he knows that water contains the Iver poison, and the look on his face confirms Belmonte's suspicions, so he throws the water in Bernard's face, and he starts freaking out because he thinks it's poison. However, Belmonte tells him to stop overreacting because he already swapped out the poison water for regular water, so Bernard has nothing to worry about. At least not from the poison, but he's going to be spending a really long time behind bars for his crimes. Afterwards, hauling Bernard off, the staff search his room and end up finding a letter in there, so Raymond hands it to Belmonte, and he is shocked by what he sees. That same night, Ingach shows up at the village to collect another Iver flower, but he can't seem to find the village chief anywhere. He asks one of the locals where he is, and the man tells him that the chief went out to guide the adventurers that showed up. And they also found out that the Iver flowers they have been giving to him was being used to make poison, so they can't continue selling it to him anymore. Ingachi realizes he won't be able to trick the villagers any longer, so he decides to just burn the entire place to the ground and take what he needs immediately. And as we see Bernard being transported to prison by the guards, he begins smiling because he knows this isn't over yet. Meanwhile, over by the lake, Takaru scans the Iver flowers and finds out that it is said to grow from the tears of a sacred beast. He asks the village chief about this sacred beast, and it is explained that a long time ago, Lord Hofalpner was a sacred beast who saved their ancestors from the lake demon centuries ago, and these flowers have been growing here ever since. Takaru asks if it's really alright for him to take it if it holds so much significance to the village, but the chief reminds him that he already saved their village, so he is free to take as many as he wants. Takaru thanks him and bends down to uproot one of the flowers. But just as he is about to celebrate the successful mission, now, one of the villagers comes running over to tell them that something really bad just happened. They all rush back to the village together and find it completely engulfed in flames, and Takaru has no idea who's responsible for this, but his first order of business is to put out the fires, so he asks B to create some more rain while he and Clay rescue the villagers from the fires. Thankfully, no one was seriously hurt by the fire, but when Takaru asks how all this happened, one of the villagers explained to him that Ingacho showed up here a few hours ago demanding more of the Iver flower, but now that they know it is poisonous, they told him they couldn't continue in giving it to him. And Ingacho blew up after hearing that. Takaru can't believe Ingacho would do something so sinister, But it gets even worse because the chief soon finds out that Gonza is missing. One of the elderly women claims to have seen Ingacho driving Gonza away to force him to show them where the Ivory flowers are, and Takaru is enraged by this revelation, so he plans to do something about it. He immediately uses search to locate Gonza and Ingacho, and they seem to be in a fort near the lake, so Takaru and Clay climb on their horses and start heading over there. The chief tries to warn him that it's too dangerous to confront Ingacho on his own, but Takaru tells him there's no need to worry because he has a strong A-rank adventurer with him, so getting Gonza back will be a piece of cake. Takaru and Clay eventually make it to the fort, and after doing some reconnaissance, B reports back to them that Ingacho and his men seem to be throwing a party. Clay can't believe they would dare to attack innocent people and then celebrate afterward, and the fury he's feeling causes him to transform, but Takaru tells calm down because if they just charge in like this, then they would be putting Gonza's life in danger. Clay realizes that Takaru is right, so he apologizes for his outburst. But with that said, he asks how they are supposed to get inside without Ingako's men noticing them. Takaru thinks about it for a second, and eventually comes up with an invisibility spell to get them inside, and it seems to be really effective since no one has noticed them yet. They take their time looking for Gonza in the fort, but they don't have any luck finding him, so Clay suggests they should track down Ingacho instead since he's bound to know where Gonza is. They eventually find the room where the rest of Ingako's men are still partying, and they seem to be really proud of themselves for burning down the village. They say the villagers deserved it for daring to defy Ingacho, but they never got the kid they kidnapped to spill the beans on the location of the Ivory flowers. They plan to beat the information out of him sooner or later since it's the final step in their plan to drive up the prices of the Ivory flower so they can make a ton of profit. After all, once Mulateria dies and word spreads that even the world's best healers couldn't save her, the value of the Ivory poison is going to skyrocket. Takaru and Clay are right outside the door, so they heard the whole thing, and Clay is now even angrier than he was before. Takaru tells him he's free to go in there and smash a few heads in as long as he promises not to kill anyone. And that's good enough for Clay, so he smashes through the door and starts beating up the bandits. As one bandit flies past him, Ingacho realizes he is in serious danger here, so he orders one of his men to go release the thing. The man warns him that it's still too risky since they can't control it yet, but Ingacho doesn't care about that right now, so he tells him to do it anyway. In all the chaos, while still invisible, Takaru sneaks up next to Ingacho and asks him where the child he kidnapped is being kept, and Ingacho is so overwhelmed right now that he just blurts out that Gonza is in the other building without realizing who he is talking to. Takaru heads out back after finding the other building that Ingacho was talking about, but there's a guard in front of it, so B offers to handle it for him. B then proceeds to headbutt the guards straight through the wall, and once they are inside, Takaru finds Gonza trapped in one of the cells. He smashes the lock with his hand and Gonza is so relieved that Takaru came to save him. However, as they are leaving, they suddenly hear a loud crash and see the bandits all running for their lives because of a tentacle monster. Takaru is fairly certain that Clay didn't have any tentacles last time he saw him, so he asks one of the bandits what that is, and the guy tells him that it's the lake demon, so they need to get away from here as soon as possible. Clay should still be in his evolved form right now, so Takaru thinks he should be able to handle himself, but depending on the lake demon's abilities, Clay might still need some help. He asks Gonza to get off his back so he can go help Clay, but Gonza won't let go, and Takaru realizes he must be scared out of his mind, so it's natural that he wouldn't want to be left alone here. It may be a little risky, but Takaru decides to bring Gonza along with him, so he asks him to hold on tight and sets up a barrier to make sure he doesn't get hit by any falling debris. They eventually arrive at the main hall and find Clay in the middle of fighting the lake demon, but while Takaru was expecting something a little more menacing, the monster turns out to just be a giant anemone. Takaru scans it to figure out what it can do, and its starting screen says it can regenerate, with its tentacles producing deadly numbing poison to incapacitate its victims. It also says that the demon was summoned by Ingacho, who also happens to be laying on the floor nearby since the monster already injured him. Ingacho begs Takaru to save him, but Takaru doesn't see a reason to help a man like him, especially after everything he has done. However, he also doesn't want to let Ingacho die before he has paid for all of his crimes, so when the anemone tries to finish him off, Takaru puts up a light barrier around him to make sure he survives, but the force of the impact still knocks him out anyway. Since Ingacho won't be able to move for a while, Takaru heads back over to help Clay, and Clay says he's having a bit of trouble dealing with this thing because no matter how many times he cuts its tentacles off, they just keep growing back. If that's the case, then Takaru assumes he just needs to take them all out at once, so he fires an ice spell which freezes the anemone's tentacles and slows it down. However, this alone isn't enough to defeat it, so he tells Clay that he needs to crush the anemone's brain in order to kill it for good. Clay understands, so he runs up and punches the anemone on the center of its face, and it does seem like it did a lot of damage, but it also caused the anemone to spaz out and knock Takaru out of the fort. In the moment before he is sent plummeting into the poisoned lake, Takaru throws Gonza back up to B to save him, but he couldn't throw himself, so he eventually lands in the water. Even with all his powers, swimming in poisoned water isn't a good idea, so this might actually be the end for him. However, as his life is flashing before his eyes, he is suddenly pulled out of the water by a talking horse. The horse introduces herself as Hofalpnir, and Takuru realizes she must be the sacred beast that was mentioned earlier, so he apologizes for falling into her lake. But as he is apologizing, she tells him there's no need to apologize because he actually just purified her land. She explains that a long time ago, this place was plagued with tons of stagnant mana, so she used up the last of her power to create the Iver flowers, infused with purification to keep the land and waters clean, but once her power was depleted, she turned into a statue. Her Iver flowers could have protected this place forever, but recently, some evil humans came and poisoned the waters, turning this place into a barren wasteland. However, thanks to Takiru taking the toxins in, the lake has once again been purified, and Hofalpnir was able to regain her strength, so she is truly grateful to him. Takeru isn't exactly sure how him falling into the lake purified it, but if it helped Hofalpnir, then he's happy. Hofalpnir drops him off a nearby cliff so he can meet up with Clay and Gonza, and they are relieved to see that he is alright. They ask him how he managed to survive, and he explains that the lake god saved him, but the others look at him like he's crazy because they can't see anyone else here. Hofalpnir then turns to Takeru and tells him she is eternally grateful for what he has done for her, so if he ever needs help, she will be there to assist him. She then disappears, and Takeru later heads back to the village to return Gonza to his family. After that, it's time for them to return to the mansion so he can treat Mulidaria, but going by horse would take way too long, so Takeru decides to try a new spell he came up with. He lines a bunch of magic stones up in a circle, and then while everyone is standing inside, he activates the gate spell, sending them all back to the mansion in an instant. Once there, Takeru is able to synthesize an antidote from the Iver flower he collected, and after having Mulidaria drink it, her Iver poisoning is completely cured. It's still going to take some time for her to recover from the rest of her symptoms, but the road to recovery is going to be a lot easier now, and Tieris couldn't be happier. Now that Takeru has healed Mulidaria, he heads back to the village to help with the reconstruction efforts since most of the villagers lost their homes in the fire, and while he's there, he makes a proposal to the village chief. Earlier, he had found some Lida's fruit that tasted like soy sauce, but after the villagers don't seem to understand how great soy sauce is, so Takeru prepared a plate of baked potatoes and soy sauce for the chief to try, and he absolutely loves it. Takeru's proposal is for him to buy the village's entire stock of Lida's fruits so he can sell them as soy sauce back in Belkame. And if things work out, soy sauce may become this village's specialty so they won't be poor anymore. The village chief happily agrees to Takeru's deal, and with that, his business in the village is officially over, so he is ready to head back to Belkame. But all of a sudden, he sees a bright light in the sky, and Hofalpnir appears right in front of him. This time, Clay is able to see her as well, and he is just as shocked as Takeru is because he never thought he'd see a sacred beast in person. Takeru asks Valpnir why she's here, and she explains that she got bored with living by that lake for so many years, and Takeru seems like an interesting person, so she has decided to accompany him on his journey. And as she says this, she transforms herself into a beautiful woman. She tells him he is free to ride her as much as he wants because she is the greatest steed in the world, and she is excited to see what Takeru does next, but he has a feeling that having Valpnir around is going to become a huge hassle. This was the end of episode 8. Subscribe to not miss the next part.